Hey guys, it's Craig at Area 419. Let's talk through the most efficient way and the best way to mount your Area 419 match scope rings on your rifle. So guys, the system we're mounting on today is a Lone Peak receiver. It's in a spur chassis. We're going to mount a Night Force optic onto it. These are all things that would be common in the PRS community, but some core differences that I want to call out here are the idea that we are mounting onto a one-piece receiver. The scope base is all probably wired, if not at least milled into the receiver. Should be very true. So there are some things that we're going to do here that might not be entirely necessary because of the manufacturer of the firearm, but may be necessary because of the nature of Picatinny. So Picatinny in general is designed for the four outer angled surfaces to all be contacted by the clamping forces. The more modern way to do this and the way that we are doing this is that we are using the bottom two angled surfaces on the outside as well as the top surface because it's substantially more efficient to attach to three surfaces as opposed to four. Now we have four mounting points on the optic, but two of them are on that top bar to give us grab on both sides as opposed to all the way across. We think this is the most efficient way for us to grab into a Picatinny rail. So let's get through our process. I'll explain it as we go, why we're suggesting we do it this way, and it's going to, in our opinion, get you the best overall mount and clean mount onto your scope. So guys, the first thing I'm doing is opening up the package of your Area 419 match scope rings in the clamshell here. What you're gonna get is a little bit of informational card. This is mostly so you know what you're getting at retail. You're gonna get your two scope rings. Inside the package, in the back here of the foam, you'll find a 220. It's a Torx key. You may use this, you may not. This is in there so that you have it. Realistically, this mounting should be done almost totally with your torque wrench, but these are in there. And then on the back of the card here, you will find your torque specs for the ring. It is 18 for the cap, 36 for the base. Pay attention to those, they are rather important. The first thing that I'm gonna do, and we'll do a little fast motion here with the top-down camera, thanks Bryce, is I'm gonna get a loose fit of the rings onto my optic. The only important thing that we'll tell you here, some people like to have their screws over the ejection port. Some people like to have them away from the ejection port. It doesn't matter as long as they're facing the same direction. That way you are taking advantage of these rings having been final bored together. And your A, B, C, D, we'll have a little graphic for that. They will align whether you are aiming forward or aiming backwards. It's all the same to us. So let's get a loose mount. All right, guys, so what I've got here is I put the rings loosely on the optic. You see they kind of rotate freely. Nothing's tight here. I've got the clamping bars untightened, and I'm gonna rough set this optic onto the system. I know about where I want it to be on the gun. If you are looking for any kind of advice or tutorial on how to find that, we may do a different video on setting up the rifle and doing all those things. So if you wanna see that, comment down below what you'd like to see. If you have questions about scope mounting that are not in here, again, we're wanting to talk about how to put the rings on, but there's obviously much more to it. The reason I'm doing this rough fit is I know now where these rings are gonna go specifically based on this optic, you know, how on the NX8, the front mounting surface is fairly narrow. So that was the more important one back here. Now, I'm gonna remember where these are looking at them, but if I wanted to mark them with a silver Sharpie, that would be important for the next part, because we prefer you mount an optic in what we will call a wet mount on the rail. What this does is reduces the amount of friction that you're gonna find between the bottom of these anodized rings and the scope base itself. This is something that our friend Hawk Spur will talk about often, the idea that substantial portions of your clamping force, your torque force, are going to be eaten up by friction in this process because of the nature of these Picatinny rails. So we are going to do everything we can to reduce that to give us a more true mount. So I know, looking at this thing, where that surface is gonna be. Let's lubricate the rail. We're using Pro Gold. This is a lightweight grease that we use in a lot of applications here in the shop, especially on parts and assembly. It's a great bolt grease if you're looking for a grease to go on your bolt. If you don't have Pro Gold or a lightweight grease, something like a heavier weight oil can also work well here. Again, this is just what we prefer. It's not the only way to do it. It's how we do it though. I've got the Q-tip here for cleanup if need be. I've got just a little bitty dot on my finger, and knowing where this guy was, I'm gonna go ahead and get some application. All right, so we've got the Picatinny rail lightly greased. This is just to get rid of some of the coefficient of friction that may cause the rings to want to stick in a certain spot that's not exactly where we want them. So I'm gonna bring this guy back up, drop the rings back where I had them, make sure they are forward in the lugs. Once it's pushed forward, and notice I'm still using the non-torque tool, and I'm using the less advantaged side of it, I'm simply going to tighten these until I get to some version. I can still wiggle it back and forth a little bit, but we're no longer what I would call loose. I'm getting to just the point that it's starting to want to be there. Now we're going to do the real alignment of the rings and the real setting, which comes down to setting against the optic. The most important part of what a scope ring does is holds the optic securely. So we want all of our alignment and all of our trueness, the perfect roundness that's inside these scope rings, to be aligned to the optic itself. So now that we're in, I'm going to start the classic process of walking down the screws one at a time. I'm going to take it in an X pattern until we get to just a simple touch. You've all been through this. And let's not worry about level right now. I'm going to come back to that. Right now we are setting the scope rings, and then setting the scope itself comes next. And guys, I know this is a little longer process and a little more detailed than you may have typically gone through, but we took extra steps in manufacturing these to try to get them exactly right. And these little extra steps are going to allow you to realize all of that additional effort. I'm now going to go to my torque wrench. This is set to 18 inch-pounds. Please torque these correctly. There's no reason to not torque your scope rings correctly. I'm gonna go a little further with each of them in that X pattern. I'm not getting the full torque here. Now that I've got them all to a little bit of tightness, come a little further. There we go, that one's in. That scope ring is set to the optic, and this scope ring is set to the optic. Now what we know is the rings are perfectly aligned to the scope, and they are basically aligned to the action. Having them have been some version of secure before, we know they're not very far out of alignment, but we know that the alignment with the optic is more important. So now I'm going to take my torque wrench, go to the appropriate torque of 36 inch-pounds, and I'm going to tighten these bases. Again, I'm taking them to just a little bit of torque first. Now, what we have is we have scope rings that are appropriately aligned to the optic and the rifle system. I'm probably at this point going to have received comments that say that scope's not level, you never leveled that scope. What we have here though with appropriately set rings is we can now go level the optic. I can take these caps off, I can go through a leveling procedure, retighten everything, and everything will still be in the appropriate alignment. So guys, this is an appropriately installed, a properly installed set of Area 419 match scope rings. It's going to give you a really true alignment surface, capture surface on the optic. And we think that this is the way optic rings should be made and should be mounted. So if you've got any questions, hit us up in the comments. We'd be happy to answer them for you. Until next time.